Something stalks the streets. Something possessed of animal cunning and fury.
I understand you know something of the Whitechapel murder.
I have seen the man. No one is gentle with him.
I'm obliged to take you back to face the consequences of your acts.
Take me back. How do you propose to do that? By force?
You reason, John. We don't belong here.
Why does he let them keep you?
I don't know!
90 years ago, I was a freak. Today, I'm an amateur.
Throw me the key, and I'll release the girl.
On your honor, John.
You have my word as a gentleman. I would have expected that you'd notice by now that I am not a gentleman.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise. At the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We know you're bored. Come on, join it.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 2 years. I think we're approaching 60 some odd bonus episodes. So if you haven't made the jump yet, definitely consider doing that, especially because since I wrote this intro that I read every week, we have also added bonus transmissions where we talk about new release genre movies, which we've been doing basically every 2 weeks since we hit quarantine out of boredom.
Lots of time on our hands. So and also
we recently started for the $10 patrons the monthly screening, which I'm deciding on at the moment right now what it's going to be for the end of this month.
Oh, cool.
Where we do an online viewing party, but I'm thinking about doing Stone Cold from 1991 with the Boz, Mr. Bosworth, the NFL player turned action star briefly in the early 90s.
Oh, hell yeah. That sounds awesome. We did Extra last time, right?
Yeah, we did Extra last month, which was really fun.
What a trip.
But speaking of which, we do have a bunch of patrons to thank this week. Pulling open the list here because it actually is like incredibly long. I actually had to like write this down.
That's awesome.
So normally we spend a little bit more time going through the names, but today I got to kind of rip through them. So thank you to Mark Power, CWW, Andrew Barber, Tony Scott Fan 1, who was already a patron, but who bumped up to the $10 tier.
Cool.
He's going to be joining us for the next screening that's coming up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Scott Fan.
We have Martin Worrell, Chris Freeberg, Kim Spencer, Jared Gorez. Jared is actually a longtime mutual. Nice to see him signing up here.
Cool.
He's a very good writer. He's fun to follow. We also have Kevin, Quinn Dobbs, Andrew Levine, Paul Ma, and I think we got one more here, Lucas Potter the 7th.
Nice.
So
a long reign. Lucas Potter.
Yes,
very awesome.
The 7th. So thanks to all you guys for signing up this week and getting all those bonus episodes. Hope you are enjoying that. We have lots coming for you.
Yes.
But that's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I know that a bunch of you are, I see the stats every week. Scroll down to the bottom there and give us a good old rating and review. Helps us climb the ranks over at iTunes and find new listeners. So we appreciate that as well.
Very much.
But those are the two plugs. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis. And joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, guys.
Welcome back. 2 weeks ago, I think would have been the last time you all free listeners would have heard from us. And we would have had the duo over at Podside Picnic, Connor and Pete, the sci-fi podcast that they do over there. And they brought with them two very different science fiction dystopia films. The seminal action sci-fi classic Aliens by James Cameron from 1986, but also Jean-Pierre Junot's Delicatessen from 1991.
Yeah.
So two very different visions of what a futuristic sci-fi dystopia looks like, but both very fun to talk about. If you haven't heard that episode, that was 2 weeks ago, available on any podcast listener of choice. But last week, continuing on our science fiction journey, over on Patreon for the bonus listeners, we did finally Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall from 1990. We've been doing some heavy hitters lately, considering it took us 2 years to hit some of these
for real.
sort of more canon ones like Texas Chainsaw as well. But we did Total Recall, which is one hell of a movie. You probably don't need to be told that. But we paired it with Stuart Gordon's sort of 1992 cheap knockoff of a Verhoeven RoboCop / Total Recall situation. His movie called Fortress, which starred Christopher Lambert and Kurtwood Smith, and was for how much it cost, pretty good.
Yeah, solid. And correct me if I'm wrong, we had Combs in there too, right?
Yeah, Combs was in there as well.
And he was excellent, playing that like greasy, nerdy kind of guy. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, so if you want to see Kurtwood Smith as a horny cyborg and all kinds of strange futuristic sci-fi, almost comedy, because it's Stuart Gordon. He always finds an absurdity to put in there, as well as body horror. There's a device in that film called the Intestinator that blows out prison's guts if they start misbehaving.
That's such an awesome name, the Intestinator.
Fun times. So again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you want access to that episode. That was last week's bonus episode. But this week, moving on here, we have brought on a very special guest here. She is a freelance critic for places such as Film Comment, which RIP for the moment. I am a Film Comment subscriber, so I have read her work before. And unfortunately, due to the current situation, as you guys can probably hear, we are still in the quarantine zone. Everyone is still in the quarantine zone.
Yeah.
So we are recording remotely, and places, physical magazines and stuff are having a hard time right now. So Film Comment is kind of taking a hiatus. But before it did that, our special guest today was a freelance critic for them as well as others, and that is Phuong Le. Phuong, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? That's
we're
pretty
doing
good.
The
pronunciation. I'm really impressed.
That's okay. That's good, because I got a little I wasn't as confident, but
you did a little pause there. You hesitant for a little bit, but then you move on. It's good.
Yeah, as is historical on the show, I always get scared with name pronunciation, and I'm always terrified of the comments being like, "You spent a whole episode getting this name wrong," which I've done before.
I like inspiring fear in people with my name.
people, you wouldn't believe the angry messages that we got when what was the writer Mamet. I think we spent a whole episode calling him David Mamet or something like that. It was bad.
So French. That's very French.
Give him some culture.
Not great. But Phuong, what as it goes on the show, we have the guests bring on the two films with them. So what two films have you brought with you this week, and why did they pair together?
We're gonna talk about Murder by Decree, and directed by Bob Clark, and Time After Time, directed by Nicholas Meyer. And they both came out in 1979, and they both deal with Jack the Ripper. But besides that sort of like obvious connection, I'm interested in how they both have this atmosphere of fear and paranoia, which is very, very 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me.
That I found particularly interesting about Murder by Decree, because I've you're probably going to have to lead us through some of these, because I'm not the most familiar with the history of Sherlock Holmes's like the writing in the films. I've seen a couple of them. I've seen enough to be able to tell like that Murder by Decree was definitely like a late version, but it was interesting to see a Sherlock Holmes story, something set in Victorian England that had that very Watergate era style corruption paranoia.
Not really. I think it's just Bob Clark. Because it's just how he wrote. Because he actually made what I consider to be sort of the best Vietnam War movie, which is Death Dream.
Death Dream is fantastic.
It's so good. It's also called Death of Night or something. It has a bunch of names.
Yeah.
And it's had that same sort of atmosphere of paranoia and sort of distrust in the government. And I think it just owned Bob Clark. Because there's not really a Sherlock Holmes story that directly with Jack the Ripper.
No, that's what I mean, because like it's not like compared to other Sherlock stuff I've seen, like that it doesn't fit. The tone is so completely different in that particular way. So you're right that's definitely a 70s filmmaker taking the material and bending it to his own interests, which is just very interesting.
And I feel like it's transitional in a way as well. Because in many ways, it feels like a classical kind of film. It's still very old school with the set.
Yeah,
because like the costumes and everything, but the way the camera works is very sort of new wave 70s with all the point of view shots, the killings and everything.
Yeah,
so it's a weird sort of transitional kind of film.
Yeah, and same for Time After Time, which is definitely both of these films coming out in the same year, both dealing with Jack the Ripper and both dealing with sort of the sort of Victorian era ideas coming into the late 70s present. Both have very interesting ideas about sort of the current wave of fear and paranoia, as you've said, politically sort of getting its way into the material psychologically in certain ways, though Time After Time is a little bit more fun and goofy in that way.
It's like a romantic comedy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's very cute.
But that being said, I think we're going to jump right into it here. So we are going to jump into it here with, we usually start with the more popular of the two films first, sort of like A picture, B picture, like you would at a drive-in. So we are going to talk about first Time After Time.
HG, it's checkmate and you've lost again.
A romantic adventure, a breathless chase, around the world and across a century. Time After Time.
All right, so we are talking Time After Time, the 1979 American science fiction comedy film. Also sort of horror, also sort of romance, all at the same time. It's a very big genre bender, but it's directed by screenwriter Nicholas. Did you say Mayer? I would have said Meyer the whole time.
Meyer, sorry.
I have no idea.
I'm not sure which one it is.
That's all good. I'm just going to call him Nick.
It's probably Meyer. Oh, he's our friend. He's Nick.
Yeah,
from the movies.
Just call him Nick.
But the film stars Malcolm McDowell, David Warner, and Mary Steenburgen. And the plot, as is fitting of the tagline, which is H.G. Wells races through time to catch Jack the Ripper. That is as literal of a tagline as you could get.
Oh yeah.
The film begins in London, 1893, which is home to the notorious unsolved serial killer Jack the Ripper, which has all kinds of still historical subjects, but has sort of taken on an almost folklorish history aspect as time has passed. Who very viciously cut open prostitutes in the 19th century. But it's also about another historical figure who existed around the same time, H.G. Wells, who is someone we've talked about on this show before.
Right.
Because we did The Invisible Man not too long ago, the original Invisible Man, which he wrote the original story for.
Thank you.
And he also wrote such science fiction stories, though, as The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Time Machine, which is a very important one for where this story goes, and also, obviously, very famously, War of the Worlds. And Malcolm McDowell plays H.G. Wells, who was a very vocal socialist and also had a lot of political and social critique into his sort of futuristic science fiction work that often either depicted dystopia situations in a critical eye, or he sometimes later in his career, when he sort of moved away from science fiction and became just kind of a political writer almost, he just wrote about his ideas for a utopia, which this film takes as its subject. Because he was this sort of futurist writer and he foresaw, the advent of things such as air travel, space travel, nuclear weaponry, satellite television, just about everything that you can imagine. He also envisioned things that would become staples like alien invasion, obviously invisibility with the Invisible Man, biological engineering, and how that fits into sort of a military industrial complex. Very ahead of his time style writer. And that is actually the exact subject of this film. Which is a guy who goes to the future, imagining that, by 1979, we'll have figured all of our shit out. But spoiler alert.
And we did.
Maybe we haven't.
No.
Yeah, we're perfect.
But yes, he uses his own time machine that he supposedly invented just for his story. And instead, this movie imagines what if he actually invented it in real life. And then Jack the Ripper, being a kind of snarky guy, he decided to use the time machine to escape.
Being Jack, that Ripper, man, just such a sneaky
Jack.
motherfucker.
Oh, David Warner was so good.
Oh yeah,
Actually,
yeah. I thought the
brilliant.
performances overall were what kind of largely sold this film for me. I mean, I think Nicholas Meyer is a clever writer. He obviously came from a background of writing literal Sherlock Holmes. Stories. He what's the really famous one that he did?
The 7%, the 7% Solution.
Yes, correct.
Which came out in 1976, I think, and actually deal with Sherlock Holmes' drug addiction. And a lot of the review actually, and a lot of I read the reviews for Time After Time, and a lot of them actually compare it to the 7% Solution as well as Murder by Decree. So they already sort of draw home and Jack the Ripper, even though the film really doesn't deal with it. Just interesting.
Pretty cool. I also
because you can kind of tell just on the overall structure that like this is a guy coming from the point of view of a detective mystery writer. That even though it is kind of like a science fiction, sometimes that bleeds into horror, as Jack the Ripper's kills actually are kind of nasty in certain ways. Yeah, like the opening.
They get worse as the movie goes.
Yeah, but it's all the opening murder with like the foggy cobblestone, like lamplit POV shots as he's like, walking up behind a woman, and then she actually like, he actually plays like this music from a pocket watch to kind of like lull her before he like guts her, and there is a POV shot of her like gutted.
And there's a sound effect when she's being gutted that's like being zipped open or something, which is absolutely creepy. But it's interesting that both Murder by Decree and Time After Time, when they do the murders, they both kind of shot the same way, like a POV kind of thing.
Well, I have a feeling
it's almost identical.
For sure.
Yeah, I have a feeling that Bob Clark, because we've actually talked about Bob Clark before. We did not too long ago. We did Black Christmas.
Yeah,
and obviously Black Christmas is the home of some of the earliest POV horror sequencing that was done, and that's what I was reminded of watching what they were doing in Time After Time, because I watched it first, and then I watched Murder by Decree, and I was like, holy crap, Bob Clark literally repeated the exact same wide angle POV lensing. But he also incorporated the breathing, which was a huge part of what was doing in Black Christmas as well. So it was interesting to see both of these films sort of using Jack the Ripper as a POV stalker. I guess that was to be fair, also, this is the same year that Halloween came out, correct?
Yeah, I was about to say. It's
which would have been the ultimate POV
I also like
murder
POV.
sequence.
I also like the differences between them. Like with Bob Clark's, it's very much more of a like a traditional kind of frothing at the mouth kind of serial killer, the heavy breathing, whereas with Time After Time, you know, David Warner gives that like very classic gentleman, I'm here to you know, be suave and whatever, and then I murder you in the alleyway. And I found that interesting too, and it's very effective. They even do like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a one shot when it's introducing David Warner off camera, and you only see his hand the whole time, and I thought that was effective as well.
Like on gloves, he's a very sort of aristocratic serial killer. He has a kind of like boredom around him. Because whenever H.G. Wells like showed up and like, oh, I'm gonna stop you from murdering people, it's like, oh, see you again.
Yeah,
just let me go kill people.
Yeah,
and it's like this profound boredom about his character that make him so much more sleazy and evil in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and it's also interesting because it's like he sounds just like H.G. Wells. Like he fit in at a dinner party with them, right? And that like shocked them. Yeah. They're just like, you mean there's a surgeon who was at our dinner party who was Jack the Ripper? And they're all like, my God, I can't believe such a thing.
My Lord.
Which, by the way, a funny note about Malcolm McDowell's voice that I read was that Malcolm McDowell accepted this role as H.G. Wells because he was very excited because of the lightness of the material. Because apparently he had just come off Caligula, which I still haven't seen, but is notorious for being a full out like pornographic and super violent.
That was something I was gonna mention, was just like Malcolm is so lovable and innocent in this, and I'm used exactly, and I'm so used to him from like, you know, Clockwork Orange and things like that. So to see him be so just human and loving and caring was very just nice
and romantic.
Absolutely.
And it's funny to think. It's funny to think of him just being like, oh, I'm just going to take some light serial killer material. Like, I'm done with the porn thing. I'm just going to go with some slight murdering prostitutes. That's what I'm doing.
Time traveling Jack the Ripper. Absolutely.
But one notable thing about his performance was that he was very excited to take on H.G. Wells. He liked H.G. Wells as a writer, and he actually did research, and he was really hoping to get into like who H.G. Wells really was. And he looked up all this old footage he could find of him and found out that H.G. Wells has the most horrifyingly squeaky voice that any man could possibly have. And he was and McDowell was horrified apparently when he found out. So instead he was just like, I'm just going to adhere to the more sort of I guess they would call it a proper
like a posh
British speaking voice. Yes, exactly.
As much as that was probably a good move for his career, I do think that I would have preferred him to go for the voice. As much as I love him in
just like wooing Mary Steenburgen with like a squeaky Cockney voice.
It'd be awesome.
With the glasses and everything. It'd be hilarious.
Oh my God. We need an alternate version where that does happen.
Yes. He has some time with quarantine. He can do it like a dubbed version for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the thing that stood out to me about Time After Time in particular is just for Meyer, who, from what I understand, he had done some screenwriting before, but this is his directorial debut, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh wow,
it's pretty impressively made for a guy who's never made a film before, and I understand he was nominated for an Oscar for screenwriting for the adaptation of his own book.
Yeah.
The Sherlock Holmes story that we mentioned at the top of the show that wrestles with Sherlock Holmes's drug addiction, which does sound really interesting, and I want to read that and maybe check out that movie now.
Apparently he meets Freud. It's between Sherlock Holmes and Freud. So it's another thing, like a sort of like a mix between people whom you think that would never mix together.
That's so great because that was honestly something that I thought was maybe missing a little bit in Murder by Decree, because I remember seeing the few Holmes stories that I've seen, and he always has like a self-destructive drug addiction quality to him that you don't see as much in Plummer's version of the character in that one.
No.
So it's interesting that Meyer doing this film is famous for maybe the one that most confronted his drug addiction.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I think the plot, I haven't seen it, but the plot is something like Sherlock Holmes having this analyst like analyzing session with Freud, and then through talking about his traumas and his past, he's continued to solve murder. Is absolutely bizarre, which sort of make Time After Time make sense. It's like, it's why we have Time After Time, because that's the way he thinks.
Right.
Yeah, and it does come from a very sort of like clever writerly perspective. Like as far you can tell that is where sort of Nicholas Meyer has the most fun in writing some of the dialogue and writing some of the like, this is a very heavily plotted film, and I was quite surprised, because is this one of the earliest time travel films to like use it in a modern way that we think about time travel, like the way that it would eventually be used in things like Back to the Future or Terminator or something like Bill and Ted, even, where like sort of like the mechanics and logistics of how they travel and the sort of like the fish out of water aspect was done so thoroughly. Because like obviously previously there was things like Planet of the Apes in the 60s which did time travel, but time travel was like a thing that was revealed at the end of that movie, and even in later sequels it would always involve like, time travel has already happened at the beginning of the film sometime and now we're already here. This is one where we actually start off in sort of like the Victorian era, and it gets you into like that mood and the way that these characters like speak to one another. And it firmly plants you with H.G. Wells's time and his history before taking you to the modern era, where he starts hanging out with Mary Steenburgen and going to McDonald's and looking at plastic chairs and being like, this is a strange kind of wood I've never seen before.
Loves those fries. I agree.
Yeah. Pommes frites.
Pommes frites. I loved the bit when he was mimicking the guy who ordering before him so that he knows how to order. And the guy ordered a big Coke or something, and he's like, could I have tea, please? Like, I have time traveling, you're not having Coke. Yeah,
he even does like a American accent at first to try to order the burger and everything. And then as soon as tea comes out, he's like, oh, tea, please. My bad.
Tea, please.
Yeah, I mean, I even think visually he did a pretty good job too with the psychedelic time travel sequence, like with all the colors and lighting, and like the reverse negative and
kind of a
superimposed compositions,
like a cheaper 2001 sequence. It was really awesome.
That's kind of what it was.
Literally going on a trip.
Yeah,
because like he going to San Francisco and he's literally going on like a psychedelic trip.
Yeah,
to get there.
Yeah, and I love how horrified he is. Because like at first he's really excited when he realizes he's in the future. I mean, as far as a character realizing that they've traveled all the way to 1979,
he's stoked.
Yeah, he handles it very well.
Yeah.
Because obviously he was always thinking ahead to the future. So when he first sees like planes and stuff, he's like amazing, and he's like taking out his notepad and like taking notes about it. And then he sees, obviously he was also part of the early theorists about the sexual revolution and stuff like that, so he was very excited that like there was like pornography on sale like right next to the newspapers or whatever.
Yeah, I also love when he's trying to open the taxi door and he just can't quite figure it out. And he's got like, Malcolm puts on this really nice physical performance as well, where he's always upright, standing. He's got his hands behind his back. He's always observing and all that. So to watch him kind of be clumsily stumble with just very modern technology is it is adorable.
It's so adorable. His body language is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think what makes this movie so great as well is because there's a lot of running. There's a lot of Malcolm McDowell chasing David Warner on around San Francisco. And they're both tall men with long, lanky legs. And it's just amazing to see like those like legs running on over San Francisco.
Especially in like old Victorian suits.
Yes.
Yeah, and I particularly like seeing David Warner here because I always think of David Warner as ominous henchman number 1 from Titanic. So seeing him as Jack the Ripper like actually made perfect sense for me.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He's got a charm.
And I also
him.
really I like how he gets to sort of counteract Malcolm McDowell's H.G. Wells, who obviously, Jack the Ripper gets to the future, and it's a little writerly and on the nose.
Yeah.
But there is a really nice moment where they both are seated and they finally both confront each other, now sort of hanging out in the 70s San Francisco, which is such an aesthetic difference It kind of reminded me like, what if classical British writers were hanging out in like a Dirty Harry movie or something like that? That's kind of like what this film ended up feeling like for me. And it makes perfect sense with Jack the Ripper, because Jack the Ripper is like, who belongs more in a Dirty Harry film? Me or you? And at a certain point, I was like, you know what? Jack the Ripper actually does make a lot more sense. He would just be another scorpion that Clint Eastwood would come and try to blast away. And there's even like, while Malcolm McDowell has his subplot where he is sort of getting into a romantic relationship with like a sort of modern, progressive 20th century working woman, there's stuff where like they're getting into having going on dates and having a nice time and having this sort of fish out of water comedy romance type scenario. And in the background, you will just see like a newspaper where it's like another prostitute has been murdered on the streets or whatever. And like, when you think about it in the Victorian era, it was like a huge scandal and everyone was out on the streets and everyone was freaking out. There was this huge fear and paranoia about Jack the Ripper. And then Jack the Ripper operating in modern times, it's just like, one newspaper headline, and they're like, there you go. That's it.
Yeah.
No one else is paying attention to it anymore.
They even mention, and I think it's Murder by Decree, that there's a scene where, someone threatens to start a riot just by saying, Jack the Ripper was here or something like that, which just kind of shows that that's where the community was, right? They were just more tight knit and things had to kind of be communicating that way. Whereas here, just like you said, if that were to happen, maybe 5 people around them would just kind of, take their distance, but that's the most that would really happen. They just go about with their day.
They're going to go home and watch TV after they're done their date.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I think this shows a lot in the costuming as well, because H.G. Wells pretty much dressed the same way throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
But Jack the Ripper, he just at home. He's like, this is my new home now. There's violence everywhere. I feel completely at ease. So he just go shopping and dress the time. He feel completely at ease. And that's that great moment when he came to see Mary Steenburgen at the bank again to exchange money. And then that great shots of her looking up and then cut to like his denim pants. And then it tilts up to like a denim vest over a black turtleneck. And the whole outfit is just like the most 1970s thing ever. Jack 100%. The Ripper in a full-on denim outfit. And then he go to the discotheque. Like, you have Jack the Ripper at the discotheques like dancing and
that's just a great visual gag.
It's amazing.
I also really liked Mary taking H.G. Wells to go see Exorcist 4, which is just not even a real movie. They just they were imagining a world where they made a 4th Exorcist by 1979.
And he can't even handle it. Like, he's hiding behind the seats. That's the
first time people see a movie, because I just realized, because the first film projection is 1895, and he traveled from 1893, so we've never seen a movie before. So
right. And speaking on the date too, I like that. I think it's near the end, but he knows of all his fiction works. But he doesn't quite know if they're fiction or not, because he's looking at them in a museum. So it's like War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, and he looks at them and he says something along fiction, the lines of, he's like, man, I hope these are fiction books that I'm writing here, because what the hell happened in the last 5 years, And I thought that was hilarious. Really good piece of writing there.
No, there's some really good jokes in this that like really take advantage of the absurd premise, which the movie itself seems to know is pretty absurd, because there's like these great moments where like H.G. Wells keeps saying out loud like what's actually happening. where he's like, I have traveled through time. Jack the Ripper is here. I am hunting Jack the Ripper through time. And there's just like the woman who's at the police station just like writing up what the guy is saying. And she's just like got this blank expression.
I love the typing. Just like keep typing. It's like, oh my God, what's happening? It's sort of, it feels like it shouldn't work. It's sort of like the ultimate high concept movie. It's like H.G. Wells hunting Jack the Ripper through time. But the writing is so good that it actually. And I really love Mary Steenburgen character in this, because she just basically hunts after H.G. Wells from the first moment they meet. She's like, oh, like this is my number. Like you can ask me after lunch. And she just like go after him. And immediately.
I love her character, and she delivers it with such an honesty and just a very genuine person. And she often does that. Every time I've seen Mary Steenburgen, she does that a lot, and she's very good at it. Yeah, she's just a very sweet actress. And she got to do some really interesting things here with that. So yeah, she was great.
And I mean, even too, because obviously they have like, she finds, you know, even when H.G. Wells is obviously he's out of time and he's not really, you know, he can't really hold necessarily a proper conversation about modern things. She finds that just very like sort of like earnest about him. She finds him very like adorable in that way. And then when he involves her, there's this nice quality where, like, you know, he was like, you would not believe me if I told you. And then she admits that, you know, she likes him so much that she trusts him. And then he actually does reveal it. And at first she obviously rejects it because it's so absurd, because the entire concept of the movie is just so absurd. But then he reminds her, he's just like, you know, you said you would believe me. And then she just chooses to believe him, even though she actually sort of doesn't. And it's just a really nice character moment where, like, she makes the conscious choice to be like, I like this person enough that I will go to Crazy Town with them, even if I don't necessarily believe it. And then obviously that leads into, you know, some really awesome time travel sequencing where, like, he actually takes her like 3 days into the future and she sees her own murder in the headlines. And then they decide to use that information to, like, go back and, like, prevent her murder. It actually gets really complicated, which is what I mean when I say that, like, I don't think there was a previous movie that used time travel in this particular way, which is kind of how we would know, you know, if anyone made a time travel movie now, this is how you would have to do it. You would have to address, like, characters manipulating the structure of the story itself in a way to, and you know, weaponizing information that is given to them, you know, based on where they're going. And so, like, that kind of stuff I don't think was previously done, at least in a movie earlier that I've seen. Maybe we'll have some listeners out there who can point us to one that did it before this. But for now, I'm going to be crediting Meyer on just, like, really clever writing to come up with, you know, using time travel into his plotting, like, so thoroughly here, and to do so while not losing track of the character work that he's doing.
Yeah. And speaking on like even the Jack the Ripper killings, something I found interesting was at first they're not very violent. Like the one now they imply a lot of violence. Don't get me wrong. It's just what I'm saying is they don't visually show it at first. So at first it's like the one is that he grabs the girl and then it seems like he might cut her throat, but it cuts and then it just does this little blood gag where just the smallest amount of blood goes on to
hits his face,
and it's very, very small. And I thought that they were doing that, like, on purpose. We're like, okay, it's just not going to be a very violent movie in the sense of the visuals. But as it goes, the deaths get crazier, because then the next one I think is like someone is hung from a bridge, and then there's another one where you see a severed arm. So it starts to get more and more almost dangerous as the film goes. And I feel like it starts to make H.G. Wells kind of, you know, get tighter and tighter within the case. Like he just feels like there's less time, you know. He's letting loose more, and it's becoming more dangerous.
I definitely think you're right. There's a purposeful structure to get the violence more extreme.
Yeah, because at first I thought it was kind of laughable, to be honest. Like, just from what we've seen on the show and stuff, I'm like, this little bit of blood on his face after he did that, I was like, this seems odd. But then it just progresses, and I think it is kind of on purpose.
Yeah. No, it definitely gets more extreme.
And I think it's also might be a commentary on, I think at one point, Jack the Ripper said to H.G. Wells that violence is catching, is like a disease. And the environment that they're in, with you, like we constantly hear thing from the TV or the radio talking about all the violence going on, kidnapping, and then senators getting assassinated and everything. And I wonder if that is sort of a commentary on how the environment of 1970s sort of enhanced the brutal murders as it goes on.
Because you definitely feel like Jack the Ripper, again, he feels more at home in this context than he did in his own previous time. So you can feel like that maybe he's even getting more gruesome, because he's like, you know what, the time calls for me to get more gruesome.
More inventive. Oh, man. Also, this is a random note, but absolutely hilarious that Corey Feldman makes a 2-second appearance in the mall.
I think I missed it.
Oh yeah,
Really?
dude. When H.G. Wells wakes up in the mall, or I guess it's not the mall, it's the museum of H.G. Wells. It's Corey Feldman is the kid that
Oh my
sees
God.
him. Yeah, hilarious.
Oh.
Everyone is in this movie.
Yeah,
Insane.
I think it must have been like one of his first cameos or something. But yeah, very funny.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I think we should. We're just about at the climax of the film here,
For sure.
which again messes with the time travel thing, because they use that information about her murder that they get from the newspaper 3 days later when they go back to try to fix it, and then they realize that they were actually messing with time over false information, because H.G. Wells, I guess for whatever reason, didn't read the whole thing correctly, and because they saw that there was a murder in her apartment, they just
And he
immediately
called
assumed it was
himself a
her.
writer.
Yeah. But it turns out that he actually killed her best friend who was in her apartment, and she's the girl who gets like the severed arm and the blood all over the walls in her apartment. And it basically leads to him taking Jack the Ripper kidnapping Mary, obviously. But H.G. Wells does like this really big plea for that, like, you know, he really cares for Mary, and he will like give him the key to the time machine and everything, because they set up really early in the plot that like the time machine, I guess, always returns back home unless you have like this key that like allows you to custom manipulate with it, which is just meant obviously for H.G. Wells. And then they also set up that there's, what do they call this thing that sits on the, I don't know why it sits on the outside.
It's like
really
an extra
inconvenient.
key.
Yeah.
It's like a big,
Yeah.
it's like
it's
a
called
bigger
like,
key.
yeah, it's called I think they call it a vaporizing equalizer or something like that, which I guess is just it is just the device that makes sure that the time all
Doesn't kill you, I guess.
Well, no, so that it like stays coherent, or it stays stabilized, I guess.
Oh, okay.
So that if you pull it out,
So that you don't get what Ripper gets.
yes, which is
science.
He gets basically lost into some sort of time infinity psychedelia.
I think it's like an anchor. Like if you think of like a time machine as a ship or something, it's like an anchor.
Yeah.
To keep you in specific time period. If you pull it away, you're sort of just traveling your entire life and not staying in one place.
I really
Something
like the effect too. I mean, it's obviously dated at this point, but just to have him turn into this psychedelic blob and then disappear was kind of cool. So, you know, there's some effects that obviously are dated, but they're still very visually pleasing and exciting.
Yeah, and again, especially for a first-time director, I was quite surprised to learn that he hadn't directed anything before, because I was like, this is, you know, I wouldn't say it's the most visually, you know, wild thing I've seen or anything, but like it's just it's very competent for a guy who's very clearly coming at this from a writer's point of view. And I've seen a lot of writers who make the way to directing and they just have no idea what to do with the camera.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of them, even worse, don't even know how to direct performances. That
Right.
they know how to write characters, but they don't know how to like get a natural performance out of actors.
That's
and I
something
think that
he definitely did here for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also helps that two of the characters are people who make absolute sense in like a Victorian era writing context. Like 100%. They don't have to have the most natural performances, but Mary on the, for example, has a very natural performance to her,
very
and
lovable.
the way that she gets to like push H.G. Wells, and the way that they actually sort of like, you know, they actually do spark a genuine romance. I will say that like as we pivot towards the reductive rating round, which is where we reduce the film between a number between 1 and 5, but it's also become kind of like closing statements and any scenes that we didn't get to hit that you wanted to hit. As we pivot towards that, the thing that I think really ended up selling me on this was actually the romantic angle, which I was surprised to find myself actually kind of like caring about a little bit by the time they hit the end of it. Like when Jack the Ripper, having gruesomely killed a bunch of people at this point, his danger has been sort of established, and he's threatening Mary. I'm sitting there going, guy, no, man.
Yeah,
that's
do
Mary.
not.
No.
don't do it, man. And then you have Malcolm McDowell, who's, you know, a very, very good actor who actually is breaking down and tears in his eyes. And then, you know, after he gets rid of him, even he's still kind of upset because he's upset that, you know, this vision of a future that he had never came to be. And then they sort of imply that he took this vision of a future to go back. And this was how he predicted things like global war and how he predicted things because he actually went to the future and literally saw them. Right. So they kind of imply that a little bit. But the little speech that he gets where he was just like, obviously I need to dismantle this machine because until we've mastered ourselves, we have no proper use for time. And then he looks back and he's like, I guess I have all these books to write, whatever they are, fiction, I hope.
Such a good line.
And then he gets this really cheesy line that he sells, which is every age is the same. It's only love that makes any of them bearable.
I love that line.
I love that.
And you can just tell that he absolutely believes it.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out like why. I mean, you know, he's Malcolm McDowell. I probably didn't need necessarily a why, but I was trying to figure out like these are really believable performances and really emotional performances by the end. And the material is a little cheesy that I didn't know that it necessarily called for it. And I went and looked it up. And Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen fell in love making this movie.
Oh, that's amazing.
I mean, you can really
I love
see it.
that.
They were totally hooking up. You can tell.
Yeah, no, they met each other. They had not met each other intentionally. Nicholas Meyer told them that they were not allowed to meet, and then so their first time they met each other was on set filming together. So their first scenes together, they were actually meeting each other for the first time. And by the end of this film, they were basically in love, and they married each other within like 6 months of production or something like that.
Wow. Well, dude, that makes this movie even better. I gotta say,
it really adds something.
It does.
And I watched an interview with Malcolm McDowell, and he said that this will always be my most two beautiful children outfit. Just so sweet.
Oh, okay. So he sorry, you cut out there briefly. What was it that he said?
He said that Time and Time will only be my most favorite movie because I got two beautiful children out of it.
Oh,
that is so sweet.
Wow, this is the most romantic film I've ever watched. Now this is incredible. I gotta say that
Jack
ending
the Ripper,
line.
love.
Yeah, exactly. I got it. That ending line. Although I see what you mean about some of the cheese. I think it's just so genuine and what we've been shown throughout this film. It feels fitting.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially for a character who has had his vision of the world and of a future just so thoroughly disrupted.
Right.
He was like, if this is what the future looks like, I am going to go back and I am going to pay attention to the love in my life first. Over imagining organizing a better society because I don't know this.
If it's possible. But I love that. I had no idea about the actual romance or anything like that. I had no idea that they got married, and that's that really brings it to the top for me. That's awesome.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to say this gets, I think, a solid 4 from me, because I think that it's just there is definitely this is a little bit sweeter and more writerly than stuff that I would normally like. I usually tend to adhere more to, sort of like the style of directing or the insanity of some of the visuals. And this doesn't have that necessarily, but like I ended up finding myself intrigued by plot, which is something that like isn't
never happens.
Normally something that it intrigues me too much. And then also Nicholas Meyer, he wrote some solid characters and he got some really great performances out of basically all the major players in this film. And he has a really clever premise that all these characters get to maneuver through, that even when there's not a huge chance for the visuals to go, wild, there is something just intrinsically visually interesting about watching a Victorian era Malcolm McDowell walk around, a Dirty Harry film for a little while.
Yeah.
And then having Jack the Ripper be the villain of that situation and having a sort of cat and mouse style thriller aspect in that way, which he definitely seems to have pulled from his writing of Sherlock Holmes stories. I mean, at one point they literally call Malcolm McDowell Sherlock Holmes, or he calls himself Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
and they're like, "Come on, man!"
I think it's the Ripper. I think he says you're a regular Sherlock Holmes when he finds him for the first time.
Right, but then he goes to the police station and he says that my name is Sherlock Holmes.
Crazy. I'm just like, You cannot report a crime and call yourself Sherlock Holmes if you're not helping anyone.
Especially yourself. Yeah. I also love. I'm also gonna give it a 4 out of 5, especially after you just said the real life romance, because it just brings this in film romance to a whole new level, in my opinion. And I also love the scene where he's in jail and he plays, once again, like Malcolm plays him just so honestly, and they write him so honestly that it shows like this fade while he's in jail being interrogated, and he just is constantly saying, "I told you, I'm H.G. Wells.
Yes.
I traveled here from 1893," and he won't let up, and just all he would have to do is maybe switch his story, and I thought that's what was going to happen. Like he'd have that kind of cliche moment where he lies to the cop to make him believe him or something, but he just sticks with his time traveling story throughout the whole thing.
He's too honest, man.
Yeah,
He's so earnest and pure. He's like
I
too
love
pure
it.
for 1970s San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. I love
sure.
and I love it. So yeah, 4 out of 5. Had a blast with this one, and yeah.
Cool. But for you, Phuong.
Wait, do I get to get a score?
You get
okay.
If you want, because
we include your rating as like part of where it lands on our overall ranked list.
yeah.
I would give it a 4 out of 5 too. I mean, children were born because of this movie. So that's
Well
good.
said. Well said.
And also, another thing that I really like is how it captures San Francisco. It's a very good San Francisco movie. It's almost like you take a tour.
Yeah, they even start to
Touristy
do
spot, on
like
the big spot.
landscape spots. Like I think there's a whole sequence where they talk about like the Golden Gate Bridge and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
And the second one, they were having lunch at the Equinox rotating restaurant, and you can have like a skyline view of San Francisco, which is beautiful. I think that's what makes it so impressive for a directorial debut as well. 'Cause it's difficult to do location shooting, but I think he did it really well. The way he sync on the different scenes together from location to location, it's very smooth.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for Time After Time here. We are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking about Murder by Decree.
In the annals of crime, who is Jack the Ripper?
Why does he let them keep you?
I don't know! A story that at last reveals the identity of history's most elusive murderer. A stunning cast brought together with an astonishing story. One of the great screen entertainments in the classic tradition. Murder by Decree.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Murder by Decree, the 1979 British-Canadian mystery detective thriller film directed by Bob Clark, who we have talked about previously on this show.
Oh, yeah.
We have done Black Christmas, which Jamie and I obviously really, really enjoyed. We also got to see it on the big screen not too long ago.
Yeah, that was unreal.
Was it last Christmas?
I think so. Yeah. I miss the theater, man.
I miss it so much.
I miss it so much, man. I'm gonna cry over here.
We were pretty addicted. I mean, like it helps that I like worked at a theater, and I would always just get Jamie into whatever we were doing.
The best.
The
best.
But yeah,
it's really cheap to go to movies in Paris. Like I got this unlimited movie card that's like 17 euros for a whole month.
I've heard that exists, but
it's crazy.
Wow.
And it's a partnership between the Multiplex and the art cinemas. So you can basically see both Avengers and I get Black Christmas if you want to.
Amazing.
That's killer.
Well, hopefully something like that comes to Canada at some point, because I would very much appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah, we unfortunately had to miss some 35mm screenings that would have been happening here, because they're pretty hard to get here. But
Good
I
ones,
helped
too.
organize them, and we were going to do History of Violence on 35. That I was really excited about. We were going to talk about it on the show. Either way, let's talk about Murder by Decree.
Stop being so sad about current circumstances.
which is directed by Bob Clark, who obviously did later in his life he did 80s comedy films such as A Christmas Story and Porky's, believe it or not. But in the 70s, in 1974 in particular, he did Black Christmas, which is one of the sort of like earliest North American slashers, if not the earliest. I think the only one earlier that I can think of is A Bay of Blood, which is not North American. That's Italian. It's Mario Bava, I think. So he basically helped establish the North American slasher genre with the Canadian horror classic Black Christmas. But then, as Phuong mentioned at the top of the show, he also did Death Dream or Dead of Night in 1974, which is also a little bit of a serial killer film, but of a Vietnam soldier who is sort of traumatized by the war, comes home and maybe starts killing people. And it deals with the psychological and familial fallout of, sort of like the war, and also puts it into a horror context. So this is sort of like the headspace that Bob Clark was in, which when he got handed Murder by Decree, which is interesting because he does somehow funnel a little bit of that into Murder by Decree, despite the fact that it's not totally certain how much the writing calls for that style to be applied. The writing is a little bit more traditional, despite the fact that it does incorporate a larger sort of corruption conspiracy into Sherlock Holmes rather than, sort of like an individual psycho, which is something that's notable. But early on in Murder by Decree, I was like pretty blown away by how like immediately more sort of like serious and scary it was.
Yeah, the atmosphere and mood is
terrifying.
very much so. Even though I like the opening shot of like the overlooking the entire city, and it has this kind of like, there's a darkness in the city, but within the skyline you can kind of see some like oranges and stuff. So it felt almost like hauntingly beautiful in a way. And then as he kind of descends into the city, it gets foggier and dirtier and darker and all that. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And it stars Christopher Plummer, obviously, as Sherlock Holmes. Mostly, I guess, because this is a Canadian production, and Christopher Plummer, obviously, a pretty well-known Canadian actor.
Oh yeah.
So I have a feeling that that's why Christopher Plummer is Sherlock Holmes here. And then it also has, though, James Mason as Dr. Watson, which is insane because Jamie, I don't know if you've seen much of James Mason, but like I'm familiar from him as he's the lead in the 1950s like Stars Born.
Oh, okay.
And he's also
I've seen him in North by Northwest.
Yeah.
But
okay. Well, he gives probably one of the most crazy performances as sort of like the toxic dad in Nicholas Ray's Bigger Than Life. Yes.
So good.
And he's sort of like the working dad who sort of like gets addicted to some sort of like pills and ends up becoming like sort of like an overall symbol of like the abusive family unit in that kind of way. And he goes really off the rails.
Wow.
In that film. And
he's so laid back in this one.
Yeah, and I've seen some really intense performances from him just in general. So seeing him sort of in his, I mean, obviously those films were from the 1950s. That was sort of like his peak when he was in A Star Is Born, Bigger Than Life, and North by Northwest within like 4 years of each other.
So he's going from that to like, you squashed my pee, Holmes.
Oh my God, I loved it. Because like after I watched Murder by Decree, I keep saying that.
Yeah.
people,
and they're just like, I don't know what to say. But it's just like, it's the best scene. It's almost the best scene in the movie.
It's one of my favorites.
And I totally understand, man. Like he has that fixation where he needs to feel it crush.
Yeah, he's got to pop that pee, man.
Yeah.
Squashing a fellow pee. So crazy.
An interesting note too about his performance though is that he only agreed to be Watson if Watson was a serious character, because Watson typically in a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories is kind of, he can sometimes be more of like a bumbling sidekick.
Oh,
and
so
James
that
Mason was
so
like,
that
that
Holmes,
will not be me.
Is that so that Holmes seems like the smartest in the room all the time, that kind of thing?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, there's obviously been so many different variations on these characters. There's so many different versions that people have done. But like, typically, at least he was scared that as being the Holmes sidekick, that he was going to be kind of treated as like the butt of the joke.
Right.
So that
And
meant that they had to like go into the writing, and like he himself rewrote multiple scenes apparently with Watson, so that including the pee scene.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, because it seems instead he tries to almost be like someone trying to ground Holmes, because Holmes always seems to be getting like overly excited or focused on something that might be even a detriment to his health or something like that. And it seems like Watson is always trying to reel him back a little bit.
And that's interesting, because that's what eventually, obviously, Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law would do with their renditions of the characters.
Right.
But what's really interesting is that Christopher Plummer, I guess, also didn't want to be like super self-destructive or anything like that either. So they didn't really include that part of it either. So then you get in this weird relationship where you're kind of like, neither of them is really like particularly goofy or like not well adjusted. They're both kind of just like friends, and one of them is like a tiny bit smarter than the other one.
Well, that was something that I found interesting, was because at first I thought, and I'm trying to find the line here, but there was this line that hinted to me that it was going to turn into one of those things like for some I think it's The French Connection, where it's like the detective gets so obsessed with the case that it, you know, ends up being violent on his part or something like that. And
right.
It almost like there's dialogue that's kind of leading to that, but then it just doesn't ever really get there. It just kind of goes into the typical detective thing, which I still thoroughly enjoyed. I was expecting, I guess, anticipating something a little darker when it came to the character.
Yeah, I would say some of the character writing is like a little bit not the most interesting I've seen of Holmes, and it doesn't help that obviously there's like, I mean, they've been making Sherlock Holmes movies since what, like the 1930s.
yeah.
There's so many great Sherlock Holmes dynamics, and so this one doesn't have one of the more particularly interesting ones, even though the overall plot using Sherlock Holmes hunting Jack the Ripper is still sort of neat. Although from what I understand, this is also a remake of a Sherlock Holmes story that already did that, called A Study in Terror, I think was the name.
Oh, okay.
There was a book and a movie made out of that in the 60s. Yeah. So they're loosely remaking that. But what this film mostly has going for it is that Bob Clark is tackling that story.
I was going to say,
Bob Clark does have a sense of atmosphere. He does have a sense of really using the period look and vibe, and using like that dark mist and the cobblestone and the low lighting, and putting his really creepy POV images into it, and even like these really tight fractured compositions of like eyes that get like lit up. And
I was just going to say,
even like the strangling at the beginning is really intense.
Yeah,
and the wide angle images of it.
I was just going to say, like, we were talking about the Black Christmas shots, and we already discussed the POV breathing shot, but that one that you just said, the eyes, there's a lot of close-ups with like
yes,
and it seems like whoever one of the Rippers are, because it turns out to be kind of like a, you know, mass conspiracy kind of thing, but it's he has almost like a black eye, you know, like it's very dark. It's unnatural. It's not a human like kind of thing. And they do that kind of similarly in Black Christmas as well. So that was cool for him to kind of apply that in this more old school horror way.
Yeah, and the style largely reminds me of, because again it's set in sort of like this Victorian period, and because you know, Sherlock Holmes himself has had a lot of movies prior, dating all the way back to the 30s and 40s, all the way up until the 60s. This reminded me a lot, actually, of Hammer horror. Now, Jamie, we've talked about Hammer horror before on the show. We did Captain Kronos.
Okay,
that's kind of the vibe I got here, which was, again, Hammer horror was when they came back in the 70s and tried to like kind of like revive a lot of these very classical stories, but with sort of like modern filmmaking techniques.
Yeah.
So like these are very handsome sets, very theatrical style performances, and stuff that kind of places you in an older context.
Yeah.
Which actually makes it more grim and shocking when the more, you know, 70s era filmmaking techniques come out that Bob Clark would be deploying here. So I think that part really works. Especially
the mood and atmosphere is unreal. I really loved that aspect of the film.
Yeah. But largely the film, as is always typical of a Sherlock Holmes story, it's following Sherlock Holmes as he descends down a series of witnesses and hunts down evidence and pulls tugs at strings until the whole thing the whole picture becomes clear.
Yeah.
And as he is pursuing Jack the Ripper, which gives the film a sort of interesting like imagery to it, just because he's technically, again, Jack the Ripper has gone in a lot of ways from being like this literal historical figure to being a little bit more of like a symbolic or folkloric almost character.
That's something I kind of wanted to discuss briefly, was just like the way that people use Jack the Ripper compared to other serial killers in history. It's almost as if like Jack has a full, like, we can do whatever we want with him and it's not insulting or offensive, you know what I mean? But I don't know if you could do a time traveling thing with Jeffrey Dahmer, you know what I mean? Like I don't know if that would be the same vibe. So I find that interesting.
It's a classic too soon thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Too many people who actually remember the situation.
Maybe in 50 years we can make a time traveling Jeffrey Dahmer horror movie. We'll see how it goes.
But it does lead to an interesting dynamic where Sherlock Holmes, obviously a very logical, grounded person, is dealing with a scenario that seems sort of like larger than life in that way. Like he seems like a horror movie character.
Yeah.
Which is very, it's not necessarily the kind of
Michael Myers
character.
Jason Voorhees.
Yeah. It's not the kind of character that, Sherlock Holmes would typically pursue, which is why it gets more interesting as they realize that actually they were abusing this very idea of Jack the Ripper as a symbol of fear in general. So like that part of the writing I found sort of interesting. That like, people might actually, it's actually maybe your government who is doing this killing.
Yeah.
And instead they might try to fool you by making it seem like it's this very superstitious, evil personified, style monster who's out there, when really what is being done here is just sort of like a typical kind of government cover up.
Yeah. There's a structure to it.
Yeah, I think the conspiracy thing is very interesting for me for the same reason, because if you like take away the Sherlock Holmes and the Jack the Ripper thing, it's almost like on the president man in a way. Just sort of Sherlock Holmes being like the anti-hero, sort of like unmasking this big conspiracy, and it's sort of harks back to this whole thing about the atmosphere of the 70s being about distrust and paranoia.
Yeah.
So it feels old school in some way, but it's temporary in other ways.
For sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that is absolutely like what makes this film stand out for me, because like as you go through sort of like these classical situations where like Sherlock Holmes is meeting with someone who gives him like a little clue, and then he's trying to figure out how it all fits in together, and he thinks for most of this film that he is pursuing like a serial killer who is just hunting these particular women, and then he starts realizing slowly as the clues accumulate that he is uncovering. Sorry,
I was going to say, it seems like also every time someone gives him a clue, that person is instantly killed the next scene.
Yes, yeah. I mean, as typical of any other conspiracy thriller that you see it.
Yeah,
definitely there is a danger quality that keeps getting ramped up as he's pursuing these clues, and then which just makes him more suspicious.
Right, exactly.
Because he's like, I thought I was just hunting like this one serial killer.
It's like, is this one guy? Like, how's he doing this?
But I do like Mason and Plummer in the roles, because even though their characters aren't written as interesting as they could be, both of them do play it like very straight in a way that makes them finding themselves in odd situations.
And I do believe
engaging
their relationship. Like when we're with them, I do feel like they have a past, and they'll bring things up, and it feels genuine. I guess it's just like the characters themselves, like the actual portfolio of that character or the profile. It's not as interesting, but the way that they portray them is still really well done and just very classical. Maybe that's where it is. We're more used to the weird and strange performances that come on this show, that kind of thing.
No, yeah,
I
but
think there's a domesticity in their relationship, which is interesting because you will see there's a scene when Holmes like waking up Watson and just like, oh, you gotta wake up, and it's just very tiny sort of snippet from what their domestic life is like, because presumably they spend most of the time not solving murder and just living together, and you have this glimpse of how they sort of cohabit, which really humanized Holmes, because I think Plummer played him like a normal human being. He's very gentle. He cries at one point, which is something you don't really see Holmes being portrayed as.
Yeah, usually he's portrayed kind of emotionless, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he seems like he cares a lot. Actually, that's what seems to be driving him, is that he's very upset about the loss of life just in general, and that's what keeps like pushing him to like prevent it. And then as he's trying to prevent it, it seems to be following him. And then he's like, okay, what the hell's going on?
Right.
So yeah, even though the overall, because this is actually a little bit longer than Time After Time. This is almost like a full 2-hour movie. So because of that, there are some, the structure of the film is like a little bit slower. It's a little bit more ponderous. It's obviously not as like fast moving and charming as something like Time After Time.
Yeah, it's really trying to set you into the mystery of it all rather than just like the adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at times it can be a little more dry, but I do think that the performances are like, they're good enough that they carry you through a lot of the mysterious elements, and putting again this sort of classical style into a modern paranoia conspiracy context does intrigue me enough that I'm sitting there kind of like curious where this is going. And as always with a Sherlock Holmes story, he has to have that big, I figured it out, I have to explain it to you at the end. And I do think that like when he gets that moment in this, after he's like, found out that there is this conspiracy involving the murdering of prostitutes, not because Jack the Ripper is necessarily particularly a serial killer who is just after these marginalized women in the streets because they're available. It turns out that there's actually a more nefarious purpose behind this, and it involves government officials, like getting them pregnant and being scandalized and not wanting that information to get out. And then anyone who has that information maybe needs to get bumped off.
Yeah.
So when you throw that in, it's such a modern sort of thing to be terrified of that I found it really engaging watching like Christopher Plummer's very classical style actor like wrestle with that. And he delivers a very impassioned sort of speech when he does expose that in the end, like directly to them, which is very brave. I was honestly quite shocked that this movie didn't end with them like hanging Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, they're just kind of like, all right, you figured it out, but no one's gonna believe you, so it's cool.
Bye.
Yeah. Something I also really like is the way that they do some of the imagery with kind of the secret nature of the Masons, like the one scene where Sherlock does the secret handshake, and then when he reveals his ring, he does like that flip to that he's wearing a ring that has like the secret compartment that shows the actual symbol of the Masonic temple or whatever. And things like that I thought were really cool. I always just dig, the conspiracy theory and the, these underground societies and stuff like that. So that I found pretty compelling. I guess overall it felt kind of like your intriguing but somewhat typical mystery story. Whereas
I was also a little surprised that the horror element didn't pop up quite as much as it does. Because he establishes that mood so early, and then he doesn't really return. There's even a scene where like he almost gets run over by like a hooded figure in a black carriage, and it's not even shot like in the same way that he shot the previous stuff. Like it's like full bright. During the day.
I would say like the first half hour is really where he hones in on the horror, and then it turns into mystery pretty much from there.
Which honestly could serve the story, because the whole point, again, as I mentioned, is that there is like this horror imagery being weaponized that's scaring everyone. And really what he's doing in the overall story is demystifying it and showing you that it actually isn't this super scary, creepy thing. It's actually just this really mundane government figures who are inventing him to make you scared of him. and to cover up what they're actually doing. So like maybe that actually does translate to what the film is about.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made there. But I definitely was hoping for a little bit more of the really creepy horror atmosphere that Bob Clark is really good at, which he sort of abandons very early in the film.
Yeah.
It does make me wonder if it's because, like, when you think of a Sherlock Holmes or kind of murder mystery movie, people usually think it's and comfortable, and I wonder if he struggled with the different sort of tones to set for the film where he's making it.
That's true.
I can see
Sort
that
of
for sure.
because I feel like if someone go to see a Sherlock Holmes movie and it's just straight out scary from beginning to end, they would just be confused.
That's true. It might have been just a matter of him trying to balance it, and maybe it's just even what we prefer. You know, we at this show obviously love a little bit of more of the grit and the horror aspect, and to just see the hints of it. I was hoping to get that throughout it, but
because the opening sequence in particular is so scary.
Oh yeah. It's fantastic.
And then the rest of the movie isn't really that scary after that scene.
They even have this
there's nothing that reaches that high.
They even have this almost dreamlike sequence where it's like the buggy comes up very slowly out of the fog and darkness, and then a body just is thrown out of the carriage, and it's all bloody and all that stuff. And like there's really good elements there. It's just for me, there wasn't quite enough to bring it over that top. But
I will say I did like the part where he does walk in on like the massacre scenario where they're killing the girl that he was trying to protect.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then they try to light him on fire, and then he realizes that maybe like the cops and everyone are in on it. But then you get this really awesome thing where like that's kind of a creepy shot, and the reason it doesn't quite work as much as horror is because right after it's like it's Christopher Plummer running through the streets chasing after a guy with like a cane and a top hat and a cape.
Right.
And you're kind of like, it's just silly enough that the tone can't quite, like merge those two things together, which again, may be partially the point, because again, this whole film is about Sherlock Holmes demystifying this thing as like not actually as supernatural and horrifying as it really is.
That's true. And I kind of do like that idea where it's like, it's just expressing how Holmes sees it, because at first it is horrifying. And then just as we get more answers, obviously
he's literally just chasing dudes
things.
in top hats.
Right. Exactly. and in that regard, I think that is pretty smart filmmaking. I guess I didn't feel it as much. That's really all it is.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's literally a fist fight scene at one point, which I mean, like Plummer definitely looking younger here, because Plummer is like still around, still acting today, still doing some good work.
Yeah.
But he was still like at least 50 when he made this movie, so it's not like the most. It's kind of funny to watch him fight the dude in the top hat who gets like I guess he gets strangled in a fishnet.
Yes,
is what happens
in
at
the
the end of that
fishnet.
scene.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think the funniest moment for me though is when Donald Sutherland appeared for the first time.
Oh yeah,
so Donald Sutherland is in this too,
to me.
because again, this is Canadian.
Because the way it sets it up is like, oh, we're gonna go to this psychic who may know something, and then there's like this very mysterious music, and Plummer was like, oh, tell me what you know, and then Donald Sutherland turned around and he has like a squirrel on his face, the biggest mustache ever seen on a man.
Yeah,
and it's like, I've seen him in my dreams. It's just the funniest thing ever.
Yeah, and he has this like really blank expression in all his scenes and stuff, because I guess he's like clairvoyant or something like that.
Yeah, he's like a psychic. And I don't know why he's in this movie, because he's in it for like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
he's in the movie because they probably shot it in Toronto, and Donald Sutherland is a local Canadian actor, so that's probably it.
Got nothing to do this afternoon.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Oh my god. Yeah.
I can take down Jack the Ripper.
Very possible. But yeah, I think that like overall, maybe pivoting towards reductive rating round on this one. This one gets the high 3 for me, I think. Yeah. I liked it a tiny bit less than I did time after time, and I think partially it's just because Time After Time is so engaging front to back, because it's such like partially a lark, and because it crosses so many genres, which is maybe not the most fair comparison, honestly. Because Murder by Decree isn't trying to be that film. It's trying to be slower. It's trying to be a little bit more ponderous, and it's trying to be about, exposing your paranoia and your fear as something that was fabricated. This idea that Jack the Ripper, as sort of like a myth, that is killing these lower class prostitutes, when really he was invented as a figure to create sort of like obedience, and to terrify the public and to instate a political cover-up. So like that idea is a much more sobering idea. You can't really have a lark doing that. I feel like you can't really have like the the momentum and pacing of something as time after time that just moves so quickly, because you really do need to experience a little bit of the fear. You need to experience some of the terror, and then you need to get this slow feeling of Sherlock Holmes just very slowly pulling at threads, and then as they accumulate, sort of coming to this realization. So because I recognize that that's like what the film is doing, even though I could have used a little bit more interesting maybe character work out of the Holmes and Watson character to maybe accentuate that. I think that's what would have taken it to the next level for me. If there was just more of a even if there was just more of a psychological consideration for Holmes being so terrified and maybe dealing with something that's so like illogical as like being afraid of something like supernatural in that way. Even if there was more wrestling with that, I think that would have done it. But still worth it to hear Christopher Plummer deliver these awesome lines. Like, for example, I wrote a couple of them down. These are just things I wanted to hit before I was done. But when people are frightened, they turn to God. And when they have no help from him, they look to the devil.
That's
Thanks,
good.
Christopher Plummer. Also, there's another way that he surmises the situation of unmasking sort of like this government cover-up, where in his big speech he says, "You create allegiance above your sworn allegiance to protect humanity. You shall not care for them or acknowledge their pain. There lies the madness." Just talking about how a government could so easily dispose of its own people as if they weren't people. And like that is much scarier to him than that is more actual madness than a serial murderer on the streets. Which again is just clarifying the idea that we've been talking about here. And then last but not least, the best line in the whole goddamn movie, which is I wish honestly this was the mood of the movie. But he says, "We've unmasked madmen, Watson, wielding scepters, reason run riot, justice howling at the moon."
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's such a good line.
And he delivers it awesomely too.
Yeah.
He's very this like almost like classical performance. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I'm also gonna give it a 3 out of 5. It almost got there, honestly. I just felt like it would have helped to lean into the horror aspects throughout the film rather than just like the first 30 minutes. Now, once again, I do get that it might be that he is kind of going into the mystery as it goes, because as he unravels that mystery, the horror is kind of disappearing. And so I do get that. But what I think would have made up for it is what I was speaking on earlier, which was this idea where Sherlock was kind of, I don't know, getting too deep into the case. Like, I found one of the lines that I had as an example. He says this with like enthusiasm, which is, "She'll be more helpful to us now than she was alive." And so and he says that with enthusiasm before he's about to leave and go out and try to solve the mystery or whatever. And so when I hear those lines, I'm kind of like, okay, I understand that he's excited because he's doing his thing, this is what he does and whatever. But there's something to be said, I think, about being very excited about someone dead rather than alive because it's more helpful to you, right? And they never really touch on that too much. And there's some other examples that I can't quite find right now, but that was the big one. And I wish they leaned into that a little more. So, but Christopher Plummer and James Mason are really good together. I thought their chemistry was good. I did kind of feel a past with them, which was nice. And Bob Clark still has some of his awesome horror elements. We have the POV in the beginning, and some of those really cool close-up eye shots are really effective. So yeah, probably a high 3.
And for you, Phuong?
Can I do 3.5? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
I really appreciate the sets. I gotta say, 'cause I think the sets are very effective and capture. Because I was reading about how most of the murders in history when Jack the Ripper did it happened in Whitechapel, and the reason he could do it there because they don't really have a lot of gas lighting around in that area because it's a poorer area.
Right.
And I think the film really captured that because you don't really see light anywhere. It's just fog and mist. And there's one review that came out at the time calling the film looking almost like a black and white film. Because when you look at the night scene, there's no color. It's just like this gray through and through.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. And I think like what you said, like the performances. And we haven't really talked about Genevieve Bujold, but I think she's also excellent in this because on the scene, it's almost like she's in a different movie from everyone else because she just gives like this very straightforward performance of the woman being locked up in an asylum.
Yeah.
And she's like the agent that brought out the human side of Sherlock Holmes that we don't usually see in other films, and I really appreciate that as well. So I think it's
because that's one of his more emotional scenes, right? So,
he was like crying.
Yeah,
and then on the train back, you can see him being in pain for this woman.
Yeah,
and that's sort of like a highlight for. So I think 3.5.
Cool.
Yeah, no, totally fair. Yeah, and good thing that you mentioned her too, because I forgot to bring her up, but
she is good, very good.
She's so good.
She's very good in the scene that she does, and also she got cast, I think, because of her lead role in Brian De Palma's Obsession, which would have came out just 2 or 3 years earlier, which is a really excellent. Obviously, De Palma being a bit of a Hitchcock Vertigo situation where she plays two different characters, and she's awesome in that. And I didn't realize where I recognized her from until I looked at her filmography, and I was like, of course,
that's awesome.
But either way, she's a very good actress, and she gets one of the more heartbreaking scenes in this film, which is the scene I think where Plummer realizes that this is so much worse than a serial killer.
Yeah.
Where he was just here are people conspiring to just completely abuse this woman and keep her locked up, and all she's trying to do is protect her child.
Right.
And something about her style of acting feels quote unquote modern compared to what Plummer and Mason are doing in the film, and everyone else like Joan Giggle, just all sort of from this other acting. And Genevieve Bujold does this sort of very modern thing because she doesn't her face is not super expressive.
No,
but the way that it just sort of she's in sort of trauma and blankness, and then
it
the
definitely
way
doesn't feel like a writerly Victorian detective novel. All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for Murder by Decree. That'll wrap it up for this week's episode. That was, as well as Murder by Decree, that was Time After Time, both films from 1979, both detective stories around Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, awesome.
They came out in the same year, which is just an insane coincidence or something.
Yeah, that's so strange.
There were a lot of serial killers hanging around.
I guess so,
during that time.
And
it's just so interesting. It's just so interesting that both would be inspired to do Sherlock Holmes styled Jack the Ripper stories in the same year,
and to have in Time After Time have Jack the Ripper call H.G. Wells Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah,
pretty interesting coincidence there too.
Yeah.
But Phuong, thanks so much for coming on and bringing these films with you. If you've got anything to plug, this is the place where we usually have you do it.
Yeah.
I have no.
Even just a Twitter if you want people to follow your writing.
My Twitter. Oh no, it's a serious handle. It's called Small and Artless. So it's actually a quote from Second City. So which just make me seem less cool. I just use my Twitter to talk about old films that I watch, and then point you to where they're streaming. So if you're interested in old movies, you should follow me.
Cool.
That's it.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for coming on. I can recommend following Phuong for sure. Been following her writing for quite some time, so I can recommend it. But for our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time with a bonus episode where we're going to be talking about Stuart Gordon, because Stuart Gordon recently passed away, and we previously had only
R.I.P.
done really like one episode on Stuart Gordon really early on in the show, where we had Barbara Crampton on to talk about Reanimator and From Beyond. But we have decided that we owed Stuart Gordon another episode because we never kind of got around to doing more of him before he passed away. So we are going to be talking about his major horror follow-ups to Reanimator and From Beyond. His two most popular horror films that weren't those were a film from 1987 called Dolls.
Oh yeah,
which is one of the earliest situations of doll horror, which would become sort of things like Child's Play. It would go into Small Soldiers. It would go into all kinds of sort of like cutesy small little figurines that turn murderous. I believe it actually is the earliest film of that, and also Puppet Master and all kinds of stuff. There is a weird doll horror subgenre that exists.
Yeah, people don't like them.
and Stuart Gordon kind of got there first. And we're going to be pairing it with his other one, a really, really nasty direct-to-video little horror movie that he did called Castle Freak.
Oh my God.
Which is a traumatizingly disgusting little cheap horror movie that he made in a castle because his friend owned a castle.
That's awesome. We got a castle. We're making a movie.
Yeah, so he basically takes like a Quasimodo story and turns it into like basically like a full out monster creature feature with really intense violence and sexual violence in it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We're going to be going down the rabbit hole of non-Reanimator, non-From Beyond Stuart Gordon horror.
Plus we get more Crampton and more Combs, which I love. Yes.
So that's what we're going to be talking about on next week's bonus episode. Again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you would like to hear that one. But after that, we are going to have a special guest on, and I haven't seen either of these movies, but I think broadly the double feature has something to do with sort of New York grit
cool
crime movies.
Love it.
But they seem particularly underrated because we're going to be talking about one called Nighthawks.
I love it. Already love it. They just need code name first, though. They need code name Nighthawks.
So we have Nighthawks, which stars Sylvester Stallone and Rutger Hauer. So I'm stoked.
Oh man, I'm stoked.
And it's also directed by Bruce Malmuth, who would go on to direct Hard to Kill.
Cool.
With Steven Seagal. So we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be pairing it with a film called Night of the Juggler.
Nice.
From 1980, starring James Brolin and directed by Robert Butler.
Oh man, I'm stoked. Those sound awesome.
So we are going to be talking about some New York crime films from 1980 and 1981. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about both of them, honestly.
Cool.
But that being said, I think that will wrap it up for this week's episode. Thanks so much, guys, for listening. And keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.